Okay, welcome back. This is the next video in my series on some old books, where I am going through my library and reviewing some of the books, and more importantly, looking at the games in the books, which are the most interesting. Historical games tend to be included because these are mainly strategy books I'm looking at, and then loading them up and putting them in a Lichess study so that you can all have a look at them later on. And I'm sort of doing a light annotating of the Lichess studies. With this, there's a lot of annotations, and obviously you want to look at it, you want to read the books. I've already done a couple of quite old books, the Purdy one, and the Abraham's one, and the Edward Lasker one, all sort of curiosities, historical curiosities in their own right. But today I'm covering a book which actually is probably worth reading. And it's a great book. I love it, and I've definitely read it. And the only issue is that it covers some of the chess ideas and topics very well, and it's got an enormously valuable list of curated games, and it's written by fifth world champion, so it's got judgment and planning in chess by Dr. Max Euwe. But a lot of these ideas have been presented in maybe more user-friendly ways and been updated through time and all that sort of thing. So a lot of the value is actually the historical interest. But as I say, this book's it's absolutely worth reading, 5-star book, and because at least some of the ideas and the list of games it goes through just really stunning. So let's have a bit of a background on this. Euwe, of course, fifth chess world champion and very, very highly involved with FIDE as the president later on, probably instrumental, I guess, in getting the Fischer-Spassky match to actually not completely fall apart. The book I've got is the one there. It's the Tartan imprint. I don't remember having this one, actually, but I do have it. I thought I'd originally read this in a Dover imprint, but that would have been many years ago. And the book is quite didactic, I guess is the right way of thinking about it. He has a number of ideas he wants to go through in terms of chess strategy, and he uses games to demonstrate the point, and it's very sort of very teaching strategy. Here's the concept, here's the assessment of this position, and here's the strategy you should use for addressing it, which is actually quite useful. Like, let's say you've got minority attack. What structure leads to minority attack, and then what are the standard attacking themes in the minority attack and defensive themes, and demonstrates with games. So I think that's a great way of learning. I mean, we're probably talking 1500 and around that, a little bit higher in terms of the level this book is targeted at. And I found it very readable, and I've just flicked through it again recently, just sort of get some ideas back in, and just found it very, very entertaining to read this book. So let's quickly switch across to the capture screen, and that'll give me a little bit of a sense of what we're going to do. I'll do this first. I was very, very, very amused as I went through the book. Unfortunately, I've spilled my coffee on it this time around, which is a bit sad. It used to be in mint condition. I should be more careful. And anyway, so in the section on Tarrasch Teichmann from San Sebastian 1912, you can see why I've highlighted this. The last line there, let the play speak for itself. Yeah, so there's obviously that's quite amusing. That's the chess speaker itself has obviously become a theme lately, and here's somebody saying that 50 years ago. This book, by the way, it's like in 1951, so you'll find that the games are all these amazing games from the first half of the previous century. We'll go through it, but it's got all these great players and games by these great players. Right, so I've just sort of outlined there what we're quickly going to cover. It's going to be a short video today, I guess, but let's see. We're talking about, so this book's mainly of historical interest, but actually the fact that it's got a really high quality list of games, which I'm going to load up in Lichess, and you can look at that later. And as I say, it's insights by Euwe. It's a bit of a historical, what did people think about these ideas and approaches at the time? And you get a good sense of what people were thinking, and then it's a very systematic approach, which I quite good, very systematic approach in terms of analyzing a position. So he's got this whole concept of goes through a game to demonstrate a point. And you can see that we've got the main topics there: queenside majority, queenside attack, knight against bad bishop, weakening the king's defenses, attack on the king, weak pawns, strong squares, open files. Number of games in each, and it's sort of like, how do you assess that position? So there's always assessment or evaluation, and then what's the plan? And then the games, it's amazing to see games is going through those plans. And at the end, after I've finished this blurb, I'm going to go through 4 games actually, which I find particularly interesting. Only bits of them though. Lasker-Tarrasch we've seen before. It's got a sort of a very Areti-like end game. Eliskases-Flohr, which is a textbook, literally, case of a good knight versus bad bishop. Botvinnik-Boleslavsky, once again, another textbook case of a rook endgame in this case, with the extra pawn on the queen side, get your rook behind the pawn, etc., etc. And then Capablanca-Treybal, which is a very interesting positional game, right? And then the other thing I'll just mention at the moment is that, actually, let me just switch across to, I mentioned a few other games there, which as part of the sort of what I'm looking at, let me go to my capture screen here. So that's the Lichess study I've created for this. And if we just go down to the bottom here, here's the list of games. So, and what I wanted to say is like the Immortal Zugzwang game is in there. There's Bronzine Botvinnik game 22. There's a Keres Erv from 1948. So it's got these games I've mentioned before. I'm going to go through all these games. Botvinnik, Lasker, Bogolyubov, Capablanca. Who else we got here? Alekine, of course, Erv, Ruben Fine, Haverback, Botvinnik again. A lot of Botvinnik games. And a lot of games also, if you look at it, from the USSR Championship. So these were the best tournaments that he's sort of extracted these games from. Rubinstein, Spielman, sort of go through the list, appreciate the standard of the players we're talking about. And there's Keres Erv from 1948. And you see he actually has this thing. I think other authors might tend to put their own games in and put their own wins in, but Keres Erv is actually a game Erv lost, so it's actually interesting that he's including games like that. And Botvinnik-Boleslavsky, we're going to look at that one. You can see how it's organized by these topics, and then you've got the games. And if we go down, I believe Hans Bumister is possibly still alive. Bachmann, Zanosko, Borovsky. So these are actually a couple of other strategy books I'll probably be looking at later. And then I've got Nimzo, of course. There's the Immortal Zugzwang game. So this is kind of that little overlap I'm looking for. Reshevsky, Taimanov, just a who's who. And there's the World Championship match. So he actually had these 3 or 4 games at the end, which were just illustrative games. And he picked a few real classics. So that is just an amazing list of games. So I've gradually sort of sorted them out and put them in the study. And it's great to sort of go through these games. I've picked the 4 games I wanted to focus on. But I tell you what, you can look at any of these games and go through them with the annotations which Erv has put on them. I'll just show, for instance, like let's pick one. And then this is like Erv claims white advantage here, knight versus bad bishop. One of many cases, actually. I'm not too sure this one. There are a few games where Erv says something, and as we know, they didn't have engines back then. And actually, there's a blunder. I think what's it, Botvinnik Sabo, there's a blunder at the end. It kind of proves Erv's point, but it does show you that actually if you're under pressure because of an isolated pawn or whatever, maybe you're more likely to blunder. And anyway, at least he uses the games to demonstrate the strategies you should use. Okay, so let me get off that and back onto the capture screen. Now, of course, I could go through these games in the Lichess study. What I'm going to do is use just Kid versus PC because that just gives you the flavor. Picked on 4 games. We can go through them quickly, and you get a sense of the quality of these games. And then later on, go and look at the Lichess study and have a look at the games yourself. Okay, here we are. That's the position we're looking at. Lasker-Tarrasch. This was a game where Tarrasch is completely winning in this position, but he missed his chance. Check. White has to move to f7 because if this bishop drops, then he'll be able to take back the bishop on f6. And then I'll show you, there's the winning line here. Let's just go through the winning line just for out of interest. What you're supposed to do is bishop e6 check, forces the king back. Now we take off the dark squared bishops, and we pick up the b pawn. So it's 3-1 on the queen side. Position of the white king is dreadful, so that would be winning. The only risk here is this pass h pawn, but no issue at all. We just simply sacrifice our bishop for the h pawn, and now it's 3 versus 1. If the white king was over here, this would possibly be a draw, but with the white king in the position it is, see the pawns are just going to advance, and that'll be an easy win. You can satisfy that by yourself playing through it, but that's the winning line. However, what Tarrasch did, he thought he had a win, but he'd missed one absolutely crunching move. So basically what he did is he just took off the bishops. All the bishops are off now, and then we just start advancing our pawns. White pushes his h pawn once. So now there's a real threat. There's only one move which keeps winning chances in inverted commas. You've got to cover the h pawn. Now, I think this is where Tarrasch, have a close look at this position. There's only one move which draws. Very strange move, actually. And, okay, so if you play king f6, you lose. So let's have a look what happens with king f6. We'll go through that line. I don't actually have it in the computer, but let me just go add the variation, and we'll just step through what happens here. Take the pawn off. Now the c-pawn blocks the route, and it's a win. So white is down 1 tempo. How do you get 1 tempo? Remember, this is a real Reti study-esque. What you do is you play king g6. And if you look at the sort of the route map, me see if I can do that. From here you go 1, 2, 3, or just for instance, ignore the but you can't actually go to that square. And then on the other hand, you've got 1, 2, 3. You actually get back to the key squares that you want. And then obviously black now has to take the pawn off. Not only that, and now you're also shepherding the black king. The black king loses tempos too. So we get back in time. Here's the continuation, game continuation. In fact, black has to be a little bit careful. Yeah, game ends there. It's a draw. So, I mean, this is I've studied this position before. I just think this whole king g6 move is just amazing that happened in a real game. Right? Okay, so really love that game. So that's why I go through that again quickly. So let's now move on to Eliskases-Flohr. Okay, so this game had been covered a second time. First of all, I think he had the queenside attack perhaps, and then he stopped at this position, or this good knight versus bad bishop, and he covered this game a second time to demonstrate the strength of the good knight versus the bad bishop, because this bishop's got the pawns blocking it in, particularly one on e4 is not moving anytime soon. Now, that's all well and good, but at the end of the day, this probably is defensible, borderline, but anyway. And you'll notice that one of the key things is this transformation of advantages. The white king had to go across to pick up the black pawn on the a file, which is why the white king's position is so bad. And so let's sort of continue. This also allows the black king to penetrate. So white kind of has two choices now. And in fact, you can have a look at this, or just it's a very interesting position. It's a really textbook case. So the idea is you are supposed to play king to b2, and we'll just go through the line. And basically, what happens is this pawn in the game line keeps the knight pinned down. By maneuvering, the drawing line is to add that in. That would be a typical drawing line. Yeah, is the bishop and the better king position. So the idea was this: king b2, king c1, get the king back in a defensive situation to help stop the black pawns was the way to go. Go back to this position where what was played by Flohr was king to b4, which you think, okay, we're going to support our d pawn, but that's the wrong idea. Okay, the knight comes back, so now the knight is tied to, but also stops the d pawn, right? And now we advance our kingside pawns, so we have this very dangerous pawn here, which only the bishop can stop, and because the pawn on e4, it's difficult to stop. So Flohr says we'll stop that on the g2 square. But now the bishop is really embarrassed for squares. But the king's going to close in, and that bishop's a little bit in trouble. But actually, this actually gets down to a very strange position in the end, where it's only like one move in it, and resigns. So one move, right? If white had to move, white would have won and picked up the black pawn. So anyway, very interesting endgame that. Obviously, starting from the bad bishop getting restricted, and then the black king picks it up, and then you have this final endgame position, which you would have to calculate that black wins this position. Right, okay, so now moving on to another textbook case, Botvinnik-Boleslavsky, a rook endgame. Just let me load that one up. Okay, we'll start here, the transition to the endgame. Now, you can see that, I mean, Boleslavsky is no slouch. He drew with Bronstein in the actual tournament in 50, 51, and then lost in the playoff. So, world-class player, and he faded from tournament play, but he was then a very well-known sort of trainer or second for some of the other Russian World Chess champions. So, just quickly transition into this endgame here. Now, there's only one winning move, and it's the one winning move you'd expect to be the winning move. Pop your rook behind the pawn. So now you have to think about this. There's a couple of ways of playing this. You could say, should the black king run across to the queen side and with the help of the rook pick up the pawn? Then you are exposed to the white king attacking on the king side. Should you defend? But if you defend, then white will possibly go over the queen side and support the pawn with his king. It's a bit more like the Capablanca-Treybal, equally textbooky endgame. So got these things. What are this? First of all, we can go for the king running across, but also we need our rook to block the pawn. So he used his rook to block the pawn at the last point. And then now, strangely, there's only really one winning move, which is just get your king active. Okay, king comes up. Black continues his strategy of picking up the b-pawn. He decides to block it with his king, so the rook becomes active. And then there's the cleanest way to win is to move your rook around, which he does. Now you can't take the pawn. If I've annotated, if you take the pawn, then there'll be a check, a skewer on the b file. Rooks will be exchanged, and then the white king will obviously win because the black king is too far away, which is always the issue here. So black defends, and now we've moved to defense from the side. Now I'll probably do a chess stats because I've done a chess stats before with I think 3 versus 3 and an extra pawn on the queen side. 2 versus 2, same sort of thing. Presumably, it's more winning if your rook's behind and the pawn's more advanced. But rook to the side is also a winning formation in some circumstances. So let's have a look. Black really just waiting. Not a lot to do. Keeping his g-pawn defended for now. White gets as much space as possible. Ready to advance his king. Now this creates the weakness that he can break into. Now both pawns are going to drop. Now you can see there's no way they'll be defendable. White will have set up a Lucena position or something. Pawn 1's dropped. Can't take, obviously. Push. Pawn 2's dropped. Black king's cut off. Pawn advances. Check. Check. We have a classic Lucena position. I think the game ends soon. Oh, he's built the bridge already. So there we go. That's the end of the game. So, well, it's not the end of the game. Now it's the end of the game. If you wanted to continue, obviously we check. King here. Check. King there. Check. King there. Check. And block with your bridge. So that's a very good example of the extra passed pawn in a rook and pawn endgame, the extra pawn on the opposite wing. And this I've just gone through the line of the game, but as I said, there are different ways of playing it. Could black do better if he defended just on the king side? And then would white have to attack on the queen side? These are all the sorts of combinations you can go through in your own study. And the final game I'm going to look at now is a Capablanca-Treybal, which is a pretty famous game by Capa, very sort of positional kill. And we'll just have a look at the sort of the final few moves of that one. Okay, we'll start Capablanca-Treybal at this position where a lot of maneuvering, and you can see black is being crushed back. It's almost a quasi-Zugzwang style of position. Capablanca opens up the A file. Check. So the point of that move is that now the rooks are not able to get on to the A file in an effective way. So now the file is open. Push the queen back. So now the rooks definitely can't get onto that file. And if the queen goes across, it'll be the rook. So you can see this clever maneuvering by Capablanca. And now he's just going to exert maximum pressure down the A file. And there'll be a point where we're going to break through. We've got Alekhine's gun. Excellent. And now how we're going to break through. There's different ways of breaking through, but what Capablanca does is he brings a maneuvering here, brings his knight over, and the knight gets to the position where the obvious happens. I mean, look at all the pressure on that b7 square. I guess have to take. Bishop drops. That's a not sweet end to the game. And Capablanca's ended up 2 pawns. Just a real strangle. That one's a very famous game. It's very similar. Same thing happened to Capablanca against Botvinnik later on. So anyway, I'll wrap it up there. But this is one of my favorite chess books. This one I've read it several times, and just reading back through it was quite insightful. And it gives you a chance. It is the list of games, curated list of games with themes behind them. Just a very good way of learning and improving your chess. And as I said, you can find some nice little quotes in there. I got the let the play speak for itself, and then an open file against king is well worth a pawn, right? So just things like that. They sort of get some insights to the way people thought in the past. Okay, hope you enjoyed that, and thank you very much for watching.